My son and his wife sued me for $400,000, as if I were a stranger owing them money. I sat in that courtroom, my hands shaking, my heart filled with disbelief. The betrayal burned deeper than any wound I'd known. They thought they had me cornered, weak and finished. But the truth was, I had a $60 million card they could never play. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room of my house, the house I worked my whole life to keep. The walls had seen decades of birthdays, Christmas mornings, Sunday dinners, and quiet evenings with my late wife, Margaret. It was worth about $600,000 now, but to me it was priceless because of the memories stitched into every corner. My eyes wandered to the photograph of Margaret on the mantel, her smile frozen in a frame of wood I polished myself. The sunlight was soft through the curtains, falling across the floor I had sanded with my own hands. I leaned back into the armchair, the same one Margaret and I used to share when the kids were small, and my chest tightened with a mix of grief and anger. My mind drifted to the money I poured into my children, the things I gave them without hesitation. I remembered the day I wrote the check for $60,000 to cover David's college tuition. I remember the way his face lit up when I handed him the acceptance letter. I was proud. I thought I was building a foundation for his future. Then came Laura's first job interview. I wanted her to have confidence, to drive up in something reliable, so I spent $25,000 on a new car for her. She hugged me, cried even, said she would never forget what I did for her. But here I sat now, years later, staring at the ceiling and realizing how quickly gratitude had been replaced by entitlement. Every sacrifice, every dollar, seemed to have disappeared into a black hole of selfishness. I rubbed my palms together and looked around the room, at the furniture Margaret and I picked out, at the clock that still ticked on the wall. All of it could soon be stripped away from me, not by strangers, not by banks, but by my own blood. That thought was heavier than any debt I could ever owe. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation I overheard when my son-in-law, Michael, suggested that selling this house would solve the problem of my needing care. He said it like I wasn't even in the room, like I was just another bill to be paid. He looked at my daughter, my own flesh and blood, with cold calculation. We could move him into a nursing home, he had said, as if I were an old appliance too worn out to fix. I caught Laura's eye. There was no warmth there. Not even a flicker of hesitation, just silence. That silence told me everything. It cut deeper than any insult could. I looked again at the photograph of Margaret and whispered, "Margaret, can you believe this? Our own children, the same ones you rocked to sleep, the same ones we prayed for when they were sick. They want to push me out, sell our home, and put me away like yesterday's trash." My voice cracked, and for a moment I thought I heard her gentle laugh, the one that always calmed me. But the only sound in the room was the steady ticking of that clock and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The late afternoon light stretched across the hardwood floor, and I saw dust motes floating in the air, like ghosts of all the years gone by. The curtains Margaret had sewn hung heavy and faded, and the chair beneath me groaned as if it carried the weight of my sorrow. I was surrounded by things that spoke of love, and yet inside me there was only loneliness. The betrayal was not just in their words, but in the way they looked at me. Laura, with her downturned eyes, was unable to meet mine. David, with that sharp edge in his tone, almost mocked me for not planning better. And Michael? Michael, with his sly grin, was speaking of my home like it was a chip in a poker game. It wasn't just about money. It was about trust. Trust broken so completely that I couldn't see how it could ever be pieced back together. At first, shock pinned me to my chair. My body felt heavy, as though the betrayal itself had pressed me down. But slowly, the shock burned away, and something darker began to rise inside me. It was anger. Anger that after everything I had given, they still wanted more. Anger that my sacrifices had turned me into a target instead of a father to be respected. I thought of my brother Stephen, who once came to me desperate, begging for $30,000 to cover a failed business loan. I had handed it to him without a second thought, because that is what family does. But he never paid me back. Not a penny. Years later, his wife Janet mocked me at a family gathering, laughing about old men who don't know when their time is up. Her words lingered in my ears now, like poison. I realized then that betrayal wasn't something new in this family. It had been growing quietly, spreading like mold in the walls, waiting for the right moment to show itself. I clenched my fists, and the anger pushed me forward. I wasn't going to let them take everything. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. As I stood, my eyes landed on the cabinet in the corner. Inside were my important papers, things Margaret and I had tucked away over the years. I pulled it open and saw the stack of documents: the deed to the house, the insurance policy, the savings account records. My fingers trembled as I touched them, but not from fear. This time it was from realization. These papers were my shield, my proof, my leverage. I wasn't powerless, no matter how much they wanted me to believe it. I picked up the deed, felt the weight of the paper, and the ink faded, but was still legible. This house was mine. I had worked for it, paid for it, repaired every leak, and mowed every blade of grass in the yard. They might think they could trick me, bully me, or corner me, but the law was still on my side. My eyes sharpened as I stacked the documents neatly. For the first time in days, I felt the faint stirrings of control returning to me. I whispered to Margaret's picture again. They think I'm finished, but I'm not. Not yet. I pressed the frame to my chest for a moment, drawing strength from her smile, even though it was only frozen in a photograph. The room grew darker as the sun dipped, shadows crawling along the floorboards. I switched on the old lamp, its yellow glow filling the space. It reminded me of nights when Margaret would knit by that very light, humming softly, while the children played on the rug. But tonight, the light shone on a man who had been betrayed, a man who had to choose whether to surrender or to fight back. I picked up the telephone on the side table. My hand hovered for a long time over the numbers. Should I call Stephen? Should I call David? Should I test them one by one to see if any part of them remembered what family meant? My heart told me the answer already, but my mind wanted proof. I needed to know if there was any shred of loyalty left in them. I set the phone back down, then lifted it again. My pulse was steady now, not frantic. This wasn't just a call. This was going to be the beginning of a test, a way to measure exactly how deep the rot went. I took a deep breath and whispered to the empty room, "If there's still some love left in them, I'll find it. If not, then they'll learn what it means to cross me." I leaned back in the chair, the documents spread before me like cards in a game I never asked to play. But now that I was in it, I intended to win. The betrayal had cracked something inside me, but it had also awakened something else: determination. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. The photographs on the wall seemed to watch me, Margaret's eyes in particular holding mine. I imagined her voice again, calm and steady, telling me I had the strength to face this. I believed her. For the first time in days, I believed her. I sat there until the clock chimed, the sound echoing in the silence. I gathered the papers, tucked them under my arm, and looked once more at Margaret's picture. "They'll regret what they've done," I whispered. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before the sun with a steady feeling I had not had in weeks. The kitchen was quiet. The small lamp over the sink threw a warm circle across the counter. The clock ticked the seconds without drama. I set a yellow legal pad on the table and wrote one number in bold black ink. 7,000. That would be my test. Not a fortune, not a trifle. Enough to matter. Enough to find the shape of love without breaking anyone. If love still lived here, that number would find it. I sat, breathed, and practiced the words I planned to use. I am a little short this month. The bank has called. 7,000 will steady the house. I do not like asking. I need help. I repeated the lines until they sounded like me. I poured coffee, black, and looked toward the living room. The house sat around me, like an old friend who did not need chatter. Strangers say it is worth around $600,000 now. To me, the value lives in the soft dip in the couch, where Margaret leaned her shoulder, and in the scuffs on the baseboard, where the kids rammed toy trucks and laughed. I held the warm mug and let myself feel the weight of the day. Then I put the cup down because feeling would not be enough anymore. I crossed to the mantel and touched the frame that holds Margaret's photograph. Her smile in that picture is patient and sure. I told her out loud that today I would stop grieving and start acting. Then I went to the hall drawer and took out the folder that carries my life. The deed, the homeowner policy, the will, the bank statements that show the $400,000 I saved the slow way. I held each page for a heartbeat, felt the paper against my thumb, and put them back. I locked the drawer and hung the key on the lanyard I wear under my shirt. I am not foolish. I am a father who has been too quiet for too long. That ends today. I called Laura first. My daughter answered on the second ring with the bright voice she uses when she is moving across her kitchen. I told her my line without apology. There was a pause long enough for me to hear a child ask for cereal and the soft click of a cabinet door. Laura said the kitchen renovation had run over. She said tuition surprised them. She said they had just put new tires on the SUV. She said maybe they could help in a month or two, or maybe with a smaller amount now. Her words were soft, careful, and dressed with concern. My heart waited for anger and found something colder. I thanked her for the call and set the phone down with 2 fingers, the way you put a fragile thing on a shelf. I dialed Stephen next. My younger brother answered like a man who always feels one step ahead. I told him the same sentence I had told Laura. He laughed. He told me to sell my truck because I did not need a truck. He told me to refinance, as if I had not already paid and paid for 30 years. Then Janet's voice slid into the call, sweet and sharp. She said a man should live within his means. She said pride was expensive. She asked if I had thought about downsizing, as if that word did not mean losing the rooms where my life still hangs on the walls. I let them finish. I said thank you. I ended the call without one extra syllable. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. I let the quiet stand like a wall between their voices and my chest. I carried my cup to the sink and turned toward the front door. An envelope lay on the mat. Heavy cream paper. Our last name written in Laura's careful hand. Inside was a dinner invitation for Friday, a nice meal, so we can talk through plans. Near the bottom, in smaller letters that pretended to be kind, was a line that asked me to bring my savings passbook and my life insurance policy so we could help you organize your finances. The words sat on the page like teeth. I stood still until my breathing matched the clock. I walked to the fireplace and lit a match. The card folded into itself, darkened, and turned into a small soft pile. The smell of singed paper lifted and vanished up the flue. I was not angry in the way that makes a man loud. I was cold in the way that makes a man clear. I brushed the ash with the poker and set the iron back in its stand. Then I returned to the table and picked up my phone. I called David after lunch because I needed to hear my son's voice and know what he carried inside it. He answered with the noise of plates and conversation behind him. I told him what I had told the others. $7,000 would steady the house. He did not pause before he lectured me. He said I was foolish to invest at my age. He said helping me would only reward poor planning. He said he had payroll to meet. He said the market was different now, and I should have listened to him when he told me to go modern. I listened to the tone more than the words. The tone said I was a burden, and burdens belong out of sight. I thanked him for his honesty. I hung up. I stood still until the quiet returned. I stepped out to the porch and sat on the top step. The maple across the street had tipped itself with gold. A woman jogged by with a dog that looked at me with kind eyes and then kept trotting. I pressed my thumb into the groove worn by decades of feet, mine and Margaret's, and the kids. I let myself miss Margaret for a long minute. We would have poured another cup and made a plan at this very table. I spoke softly into the open air. "We will handle this, Meg," I said. We always did. Then I drove to the small electronics store on Maple Avenue and bought a pocket recorder. It fit in my palm like a smooth river stone. The clerk bagged it and wished me luck with my project. Back home, I read the directions twice, put in fresh batteries, and pressed record. I stated the date and the time and the purpose. I said I would be recording calls because memory can bend when it is bruised. I said I wanted the truth to sit straight. I set the recorder on the table where the red light could watch over the next calls and keep me company. I called the bank and asked for security. A woman named Gloria answered with a calm voice that sounded like a porch in summer. I told her I wanted alerts on every account. Any withdrawal over $5,000 required me to be in person with identification. No verbal approvals, no phone approvals, no third-party access of any kind. She asked if I wanted to add a password. I said yes. 4 words. "We will handle this." She said she liked the sound of that. I asked about a safe deposit box. 2 hours later, I slid the deed, the insurance policy, the will, and a printed list of my account alerts into a narrow metal drawer and turned a key that answered with a clean click. By dusk, I had one more call to make. Ruth answered on the first ring, her voice warm and plain, like soup on a cold night. I told her I was in a tight spot. I said I needed $7,000 to keep the house steady. She did not ask why. She said she could gather 3, maybe a little more if she sold a ring she never wore. She said she wished it were more. She said, "Family helps family." I stood in the kitchen with my hand on the wall to steady myself and told her no, to please keep it for herself. I thanked her for offering what she could not easily spare. I thanked her twice. After we hung up, I stayed with my palm on the cool plaster and let grateful tears come and go like a small tide. That night, I lined up what I had learned the way a carpenter lines up boards before the first cut. Laura, sympathy dressed as delay. Stephen and Janet, jokes and judgment. David, lecture and blame. Ruth, open hand. The dinner invitation that was not a dinner. The box at the bank. The password was a promise. The recorder was blinking like a small red heartbeat beside my notepad. I went to bed with a plan I could name in one breath. Collect proof, set boundaries, keep the house, keep myself. The next morning, I shaved smoothly and put on a clean shirt because dignity is a tool, and I needed every tool I had. I drove downtown to the office of Susan Clark, the lawyer who handled Margaret's estate. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon and paper. Susan listened without interrupting while I laid out the last 48 hours like a map. She nodded and took notes. When I finished, she said we would start by documenting my capacity and my boundaries. We would send a letter that said I am competent, that my finances are my own, and that any attempt to move me, sell my house, or access my accounts without my consent would be met with formal action. Her voice made the room feel square and safe. On the way home, I stopped at the post office and sent 3 certified letters with return receipts. The clerk stamped the forms with a soft thud that sounded like a nail seated correctly. I put the little green receipts in my pocket and walked outside into the noon air that smelled like hot asphalt and coffee from the diner across the street. I drove home with the windows down and the radio off. The wind moved through the car and took a little of the ache with it. Back at the kitchen table, I pressed record and left a message for Laura. I said I loved her and that my finances were private and would remain so. I said I would not be attending a dinner where my papers were the real guests. I said if she wanted to talk about my future, we would do it at Susan's office. I left a similar message for David. For Stephen, I said I would not be selling my truck and that I needed a brother more than I needed advice. I wrote notes about each message in the notebook I keep by the phone, dates, times, tones. Notes are a kind of courage when a man is tempted to doubt his own eyes. Evening fell slow and kind. I made eggs and toast and ate standing at the counter the way I used to when Margaret and I were young and money was thin. I washed the pan, wiped the counter, and took the trash out. The porch light drew a soft circle on the steps. Somewhere, a ball game is being played on a radio. A neighbor waved. I raised my hand back. It was not joy that touched me. It was a purpose, and purpose can hold a man upright when sweetness cannot. The next morning, the phone rang at 10. Laura. She asked if I had received the invitation. I said I had. She said Michael had done a lot of research and could help me avoid mistakes. She said if I brought my passbook and insurance policy, we could get things set up, and it would make everyone more comfortable. I told her I had a lawyer. I told her my papers were not leaving my possession. The line went very quiet. Then she said she hoped I would not make this hard. I said I hoped so too. I ended the call and wrote everything down while my memory was still hot. I called the mortgage company next. I asked whether any information could be given to a third party who claimed to be assisting me. The representative said no, not without my password. I set the password to the same 4 words I had chosen at the bank. We will handle this. I wrote those words again on the inside cover of my notebook and closed the cover. The click of the cardboard felt like a lid settling on a simmer that had gone on too long. In the afternoon, I made copies of everything: the deed, the policy, the will, Susan's letter, and the bank alerts. I rented a second small box for duplicates and put the copies there. I made a list of what lived in each box and taped the lists to the inside of the hall closet door. Margaret would have liked the order. She loved a tidy drawer and a labeled shelf. On the way home, I bought a jar of wood putty and a bag of nails to fix the loose stair tread that had bothered me all year. When I pulled the board free, I found a penny from the year Laura was born and set it on the mantel as if fortune had tapped me on the shoulder. As the light went soft, I sat with the recorder and played the last calls. I listened to my voice to make sure it stayed calm. I listened to theirs to remind me why the plan mattered. I labeled each file with the date and a short phrase and copied them to the memory card. People can argue about feelings. They cannot outrun a recording. The little red light blinked, and I felt steadier. Then came the small twist I did not expect. Late afternoon, a second envelope slid through the mail slot. It looked like a thank you card, pale blue, a little too cheerful. Inside was a note in Michael's handwriting. He and Laura wanted to take me to dinner at a steakhouse I like. At the bottom, in a line that pretended to be helpful, he wrote that it would be wise to bring my passbook and the life insurance policy so he could scan them with a portable scanner he had purchased. He underlined the word wise. I stood in the hallway and felt like a deer watching a salt lick. It knows is wrong. I folded the note in half and fed it to the same flame that took the first invitation. The fire did its tidy work. I watched the ash crumble and told myself the truth. I had been prey long enough. I ended the day by writing 3 sentences on a fresh page, like vows. Do not meet them where they are strong. Do not let them rename pressure as care. Do not let them turn my quiet into consent. I slid the page under the clock so I would see it in the morning. On the 3rd morning, there was a voicemail from Stephen. He said I was making a mountain out of a molehill. He said pride is expensive. He said he knew a buyer who would take the house quickly, cash, no inspections. He left a number. I wrote it down, drew a small square beside it, and penciled an X through the square. That felt better than cursing. A pencil line makes a softer truth than a shout in an empty room. By late afternoon, I called Ruth again to check on her knee. She said it ached in the rain. She asked about my spirits. I told her the truth. I said I felt like a tree that had leaned toward the wind for years and had finally found the gust that set it straight again. She laughed, and the sound came through the phone like a lamp being switched on. She told me Margaret would be proud. I closed my eyes and believed her, because believing her hurt less than doubting everyone. As the evening settled, I pulled a chair to the front window and watched the neighborhood return from work. People carried grocery bags and waved to one another. Doors opened, then shut. A boy in a red jacket rode his bike with one hand and looked like freedom itself. Normal life kept moving. Mine had tilted all week, but now it felt like it had found a new line. Protect the house, protect the savings, protect the dignity that took a lifetime to earn. Do it calmly, do it with proof, do it with patience. I stacked the manila envelopes in a file box and wrote a label in thick marker, documentation. I placed the box on the top shelf of the hall closet where a person would need a chair to reach it. I checked the recorder's battery, put 2 fresh batteries in the drawer with the candles, and set the device beside a clean pen and a fresh pad. The tools of a quiet fight. I locked the front door, checked the back, and wrote one final line in my notebook, then read it aloud so the walls would hold it with me. They think I am weak. They will learn otherwise. In the late afternoon, I went to the bank and asked to see the branch manager. Her name was Carla. She led me to a glass office and listened. I told her that if anyone called about my accounts, claiming to help or to represent me, the answer must be no until she heard my voice in person. I asked her to flag my profile, require identification for every change, and call my cell if anything felt wrong. She typed notes, read them back, and added an alert to my file. Before I left, she slid a card across the desk and said she would watch the accounts. I thanked her. Outside, the air was cooler. That meeting was a lock added to a door. I needed locks, and I needed witnesses. Before I closed the notebook, I wrote one last sentence. Not for my children, not for Stephen, not even for Ruth. For me, for the man I have been and the man I am becoming because this demanded it. They do not know that I now hold something none of them can touch, a record that will change everything when the time comes. I shut the book, pressed my palm on the cover as if sealing an envelope, and stood still until the quiet gave me a little peace. They think I am weak. The game has just begun. I am ready. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment too below to let me know you're here with me. I woke to a sky the color of pewter and a house so still I could hear the heater exhale. Today would not drift. Today would land. I brewed coffee, strong and dark, and laid out the folder of copies I had made, the originals resting in a safe deposit. The deed, the policy, the bank alerts. Susan Clark's letter with my name spelled steadily across the top. Everything from yesterday's planning now waited like tools on a bench. It was time to use them. I drove to Susan's office. Her office was quiet and bright. We reviewed the plan. Capacity letter signed, boundaries written, bank alerts confirmed, a duplicate set sealed in a second box. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside were certified notices I would send today. On the way home, I stopped at the post office and watched each notice take a stamp. 1, 2, 3. The clerk slid the receipts toward me with the same small nod he must give to 100 people a day. I took them like they were medals and tucked them into my wallet. Action steadies a person. Steps make a road. Back home, I set the recorder on the table and pressed the red button. I stated the date and the reason. Saying it out loud gave the words weight. The little red eye listened without judgment. It felt like company. Near noon, the phone rang. Carla from the bank. Her voice carried a careful calm that made my grip tighten anyway. She told me a caller claiming to be my legal representative had asked to speak about consolidating my accounts and moving oversight to him for my safety. He said his name was David, my son. He had used phrases like urgent, deteriorating, and acting in his best interest. Carla said the password stopped the request. She wanted me to know. She wanted to confirm I was safe. I thanked her slowly, because there are moments when a person should not rush over the surface of a deep thing. I set the phone down and stood still in my kitchen. The old clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. "He did it," I said to the empty air. Anger did not shout. It rose like heat, clean and bright. I touched Margaret's picture frame. "Our boy tried to take the wheel while I'm still breathing," I whispered. I called Susan. She answered on the second ring. I told her exactly what Carla had reported. Susan said we would add an addendum. She dictated precise language, and I wrote it down. Notice is hereby given that no person is authorized to act on my behalf. Any claim of representation is false unless accompanied by my physical presence and written consent, witnessed in this office. She told me to bring it over. She would notarize it today. I thanked her. Then I thanked her again because fury can make a person forget their manners, and I wanted to remember mine. By 3 o'clock, the addendum was signed and copied. Susan sealed copies for David, Laura, and Stephen. "You are not alone," she said. "You have a record and rights." Paper is not love, but sometimes it is safety. When I turned onto my street, a pickup I recognized sat in front of my house. Stephen was on the porch rail like a man on sale day, arms crossed, grin sharp. Janet stood in the walkway with her sunglasses on, though the sun had slipped. I parked, stepped out, and closed the car door with a quiet click. No slamming, no fuel for their story. Inside, I asked them to sit in the living room. Stephen said he had a cash buyer. Quick, no inspections. He named a number that made my jaw clench. Janet laughed and called it a graceful exit. Laura arrived late and silent. I did not argue. I told them we would have a family meeting on Saturday evening. All of us? No side talks. One room, one time. "We will put everything on the table," I said. "My terms too." "Tea." Stephen shrugged like a man who believes the ending is already written. They left a draft of chill behind them like a door half open in winter. The next 2 days were simple on purpose. I cooked, I swept the porch, I checked the recorder and labeled each file. I slipped extra copies of Susan's letters into a plain folder. I wrote my one line on a card and put it in my pocket. Better to be ready. Saturday came gray and still. I made coffee and put out water glasses because even hard nights go better if people can sip something. I placed the recorder on the coffee table and stacked the letters beside it. I set the chair I would use where the lamp could find my face. I opened the curtains so no one could say I hid. At 6, the doorbell rang. The room shifted like air before a summer storm. They filed in. David first, jaw tight, shoulders pressed forward. His wifey eye behind him, her eyes taking inventory. Laura next, alone, her hands twisting. Michael last, holding a smile that did not reach his eyes. Stephen and Janet slid onto the couch as if they owned the cushions. I stayed on my feet until everyone sat. Then I lowered myself into my chair and rested both palms on the armrests. I could feel the grain of the wood under my skin. That steadied me more than the coffee had. I began with the simple parts: bank alerts, password, safe deposit boxes, Susan's letters, the addendum. I said I would not be moved, sold, or managed. Not by pressure, not by trick. Any future talk would happen in Susan's office. David started to interrupt. I lifted my hand, and he stopped. I said we would all have time to speak. Then I pressed play on the recorder. Laura's careful voice offered help later, maybe a smaller amount now. Stephen laughed and told me to sell my truck. Janet said a man should live within his means. David lectured me about poor planning at my age. The room did not breathe. I clicked the button and the sound stopped. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Stephen tried. He said I had taken things out of context. He said jokes sound rough on tape. He said he meant well. Janet added that I had always been sensitive. Michael said recordings were not fair because people say things when they are stressed. Laura looked at me with eyes that shone but did not spill. David leaned forward and broke the thin calm. He said he had called the bank because he was worried. He said he was doing what any good son would do. Carla's careful voice from earlier answered him in my memory with a single word: unauthorized. I lifted Susan's letters and slid one across the table to each of them. I told them what they contained in simple words. I told them what the addendum meant. I told them what would happen if anyone tried to act for me again without me in the room. There will be consequences, I said, and I heard Margaret in that sentence, the way she used to warn the kids when they were small and wild. Calm, certain, not loud. Consequences. David's face went red. He said I was overreacting, that lawyers cost money, and that I should trust him. I thought of the bank call and the word deteriorating in his voice. I thought of the envelope that asked for my passbook. I said I did trust. I trust paper, dates, playback, and a key in a lock. Stephen shifted in his seat and put the number on the table again for a buyer who would pay cash. I picked up the scrap of paper and tore it in half. Not with drama, like a receipt I did not need. Janet made a sound like a scoff, then stared at the ceiling as if the light fixture offended her. Laura whispered that she never wanted to hurt me. I believed the whisper. I did not let it move the plan. Michael asked if we could at least agree to consolidate my accounts to make them simpler. I told him simple is not the same thing as safe. I could feel the room leaning toward another round of defending and explaining. I could feel their energy reaching for the same levers that had moved me in the past. Guilt, pity, noise. Before the pattern could spin up, I reached under the coffee table and brought out a plain white envelope I had prepared for this moment. I placed it on the wood where everyone could see it and kept my hand on top of it as if it were a small animal that might startle. "There is one more thing," I said. My voice sounded like a road you can trust in the rain. I lifted the flap and slid out a single page. I did not hand it around. I read it. I read the date 3 weeks ago. I read the claim number. I read the amount. $60 million. I read the name of the trust Susan had formed to stand between me and noise. I read the sentence that said the trust was irrevocable and that distributions would be made at my discretion to causes and people of my choosing. I put the paper down where the light could find the numbers. Then I folded my hands in my lap and waited. No one spoke for a beat that stretched and stretched. Then the room broke. Stephen swore softly. Janet said this changed everything, and then corrected herself and said this clarified everything. Michael sat up like a man offered a seat at a new table and began to talk about growth and management and protecting principle. Laura made a small sound, like a gasp swallowed backward. David stood. His chair scraped. He said, if I had that kind of money, then I did not need the house, and I did not need to cling to old routines. He said we could all move forward if I would let wise counsel guide me. When the room was as quiet as it would get, I said what I had decided to say in the night when the house was kind and honest. None of you will receive a cent because you asked with your hands out and your hearts closed, I said. You will not touch this house worth $600,000. You will not touch my savings, $400,000 set aside over the years. Now, you will not touch the trust. You have shown me what you do when you believe I am weak. You have shown me what you do when you believe I am strong. Either way, you reach. I am not a rung on your ladder. The words did not feel cruel in my mouth. They felt exact. David's eyes went wet and hard at the same time. He said I was choosing strangers over family. He said I was punishing success. He said I had no right to test them. I told him a father has every right to know the truth. I told him I would rather sit in a small house with my dignity than in a large house owned by someone else's demands. I told him Margaret taught me that love without respect is a leash. I will not wear one. Stephen asked if logic could enter the room. He spoke about taxes as if the IRS were the person I needed to fear. Janet said philanthropy looks good in the paper. Michael said he could build a plan that would satisfy everyone. Laura asked what I wanted, her voice thin as thread. I told them I wanted peace. I wanted my mornings. I wanted my porch. I wanted to give where giving still looks like love. I wanted to stop explaining the difference between help and control to people old enough to know it. I stood. The meeting was over. The letters in their hands were the only terms that mattered. Any future talk would go through Susan. David said he would see me in court, then eyed the recorder and went quiet. Stephen called me stubborn. Janet said she hoped I enjoyed my principles. Michael recalculated in silence. Laura whispered goodbye. They left in a staggered line, as if the house had become narrower on the way out. The door clicked shut. The room exhaled. I sat back down and let my palms rest on the wood again. The grain felt like a map of years. I pressed the stop button. The red light went out, and in the small silence that followed, I heard my own breath. It was steady. It was mine. I stepped onto the porch and drew the cool evening into my chest. The maple across the street whispered. I thought of the green cards in my wallet and the copies in 2 boxes. Justice can be simple. A door, a lock, a sentence said plainly. A man deciding who he will be in his own house. I walked the length of the porch, boards sounding a familiar rhythm. I pictured the days ahead. Meet Susan to complete filings. Visit the bank for one more alert. Call Ruth. Write the hospital foundation Margaret loved, promising a gift. Not triumph. Just a floor repaired under my feet. Enough. Before I went back inside, I spoke into the dark for Margaret, because old habits are not weaknesses. We did what we had to do, I said. They know now. I know now. The porch light made a small pool around the step where I once sat tying David's shoe while he leaned against my shoulder. Memory does not erase truth. It just makes the truth human enough to bear. I locked the door and left one light on over the sink, the way Margaret always did. Tomorrow would bring forms and decisions and maybe more noise. I did not dread it. I was ready for the work of peace. The plan had held. The bank had held. My voice had held. The house had held. Inside the quiet, I whispered one more line for myself as much as for anyone who might someday hear this story. They thought I was fragile. They thought I would fold. They thought they could move me like furniture. They were wrong. They have seen the cost. They will live with the echo of this evening. And I will live with my porch, my morning coffee, and the long good work of giving where kindness still looks like kindness. Before sleeping, I wrote a list on a yellow pad and set it by the door. Call Susan on Monday to file the final notices. Meet Carla to add an alert code that she and I will know. Draft a letter to the hospital foundation in Margaret's name. Take Ruth to lunch and tell her what her kindness meant when no one else reached out. Buy new porch lights. Small things. Small, solid things. I wanted the next days to look like life, not a fight. That would be my answer. Now. Kam giak bi ksem neva bijay rakhoy kwak joy min that kokhon pai kong. New bantin rang moingoiju ksung jang juach kong nhanva tontrong hoi bin luan tukhua. Justice. Gio hoi ksem hoselamgi jete joy jiujo. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after that storm of a meeting, the house felt different. The walls, once heavy with betrayal, seemed lighter. The air felt freer, as if Margaret herself had opened a window. The documents were signed, the recordings sealed, and the choices made. Now came the task of closing one door and opening another. I stood in the living room for a long moment, my hand resting on the mantel, and whispered to Margaret, "We did it. They can't touch me now." Then I walked upstairs, gathered my papers into a leather folder, and called Susan Clark. By noon, we had arranged the sale. The house that had been my anchor for decades, worth $600,000, was no longer a battlefield. Within 2 weeks, it was sold. The proceeds, after every signature and seal, were placed not into the greedy hands that had waited around me, but into a trust with a purpose, a fund for education. Margaret had always said the best way to honor money was to let it lift someone who thought they had no chance. I placed the check into the account with steady fingers, a lump in my throat. That money would not rot in bitterness. It would grow in hope. I did not walk away empty. I kept enough to secure a home for myself. Not the grand house full of echoes and shadows, but a modest apartment near the park, worth about $200,000. It had light that came in softly through the curtains, and a balcony where I could see the tops of trees shift in the wind. The rent was steady, the space easy to clean, and no corner carried the weight of betrayal. On my first night there, I sat in a plain chair, listening to the muffled laughter of children playing outside, and I breathed as if I had just set down a heavy pack carried too far. For the first time in years, I slept without grinding my teeth. The others did not fare so well. News traveled quickly through the family grapevine, and word spread through town faster than I expected. David and Laura, once so confident in their silence and calculation, found themselves pushed aside by cousins and neighbors alike. No one wanted to invite them to gatherings. No one trusted their smiles. Michael lost his job soon after. His arrogance had caught up with him at the firm. Without a paycheck, he leaned on Laura, and her friends drifted away when they saw the bitterness rising. Stephen, full of promises and deals that never held, drowned in his own debts. Collection letters piled up. Sharon, sharp-tongued as ever, turned her venom on anyone who would listen, but fewer and fewer people stayed in the room. Eventually, her words fell into the air without echo. The contrast was sharp, almost cruel. While they circled in chaos, I found peace. I woke in the mornings and made black coffee, the way Margaret liked it. I sat by the window and read books I had put off for years. History, poetry, and even mysteries kept me company at night. I walked in the park, listening to the crunch of leaves under my shoes, nodding to joggers and families with strollers. The church down the street welcomed me. I joined their men's group, where no one asked for my savings account, but only offered a handshake and a place to sit. There was warmth there, and I let myself lean into it. One evening, I took Margaret's photo and placed it on the small table by my chair. I lit a candle and whispered, "Margaret, I'm finally free." My voice cracked, but not from pain, from release. The kind that comes when a man lays down the burden of betrayal and steps into his own worth again. There were phone calls, of course. One night Laura called, her voice trembling. She asked for forgiveness. She said Michael had pressured her, that fear had made her cruel. She wanted to visit. I listened quietly. When she finished, I spoke slowly, each word like a brick in a wall. "I don't need an apology, Laura. I have my life now, and it doesn't include this pain anymore." I hung up before her silence could bend me. I leaned back in my chair and whispered into the empty room, "I don't need them. I have myself." The lesson was sharp but clear. Blood may bind, but respect defines family. Money does not change who people are. It only strips away the mask, revealing the hunger underneath. Betrayal had taught me that boundaries are not walls to keep love out. They are gates that keep dignity in. Without them, no house, no account, no inheritance is safe. I learned, too, that freedom can come late, but it comes. It wears simple clothes and carries no interest in grandeur. It looks like walking at your own pace, choosing who sits at your table, and knowing that every dollar you guard or give away belongs first to your choice, not to the demand of another. As months passed, I felt the weight fall from my shoulders, piece by piece. The neighbors in my new building waved as we passed in the hall. I bought a second-hand bookshelf and filled it with novels and Margaret's old cookbooks. On Sunday afternoons, I tried one of her recipes, laughing at myself when the bread came out lopsided or the stew too salty. It felt like bringing her back into the kitchen for a moment, and I did not feel lonely. I felt accompanied by memory without being chained to grief. I watched from a distance as my children faced their choices. David moved into a smaller house after the bills stacked too high. Stephen sold his car to cover one debt and then another. Sharon's voice grew sharp enough to drive even friends away. And Michael, stripped of his job, his confidence broken, spent long days behind closed blinds. They were not ruined, but they were marked. They carried the shadow of what they tried to do, and it showed in the way others stepped back. Meanwhile, I carried peace, a new rhythm. Each evening I sat with my journal and wrote one line about what the day gave me. A conversation with a kind stranger, a good meal, a bird on the balcony railing. I was no longer writing down betrayal. I was writing down life. The greatest gift came not from money, but from dignity. That was Margaret's word, always. She told me once, long before the money ever came, that dignity is the only inheritance worth fighting for. I used to think she meant reputation. Now I know she meant self-respect, the kind that makes a man stand when others try to bend him, the kind that whispers in the dark, "You are enough." So when Laura called again, months later, with another apology, I said the same words with even more certainty. "I don't need it. I have my own life." She cried, but I stayed steady, because love without respect is just a chain, and I had broken mine. The apartment became more than a shelter. It became a beginning. I joined a local charity, a small group that raises funds for scholarships. I sat in meetings with people who had no interest in my past and only wanted to know how we could help. I shared Margaret's dream of lifting young people, and they welcomed it. I felt her smile again in those rooms, in the laughter of students who received their first checks, in the thank you notes written in crooked handwriting. That was where the money belonged. That was where love grew, not shrank. At night, I would close my journal with one line of truth. I am free, and I believed it. Each morning proved it again. In the end, the lesson was simple, but hard-won. Family is not the blood that betrays you. It is the hands that lift you, the voices that respect you, the hearts that walk with you. Money never poisoned them. It revealed who they had always been. And I, after years of carrying both grief and loyalty, finally chose myself. I chose dignity. I chose peace. The phone still rings sometimes. Messages still come. But I do not answer, because the chapter has closed. I do not need their apologies or their explanations. I have my own life, and I intend to live it without the weight of betrayal dragging behind me. As I whispered one last time into Margaret's photograph, I don't need them anymore. I have myself. And with that, the door truly closed, leaving me facing a life that was no longer defined by loss, but by choice. A quiet apartment, a community of kindness, a park outside my window, and the unshakable truth that freedom is found not in wealth, but in boundaries and in the courage to keep them. The betrayal that once nearly broke me had instead handed me the sharpest lesson of all. Respect is the real inheritance, and it cannot be stolen. Now I was ready for what came next. A project, a purpose, a life after the storm. A chapter not of pain, but of beginning. And as I looked out over the park that evening, I smiled at the thought. The story was not over. It was only changing shape. I wake each morning now to the sound of sparrows outside my window. The light pours through the curtains of my new apartment, soft and golden, painting the walls in a way that feels like a blessing. The place is not grand. 2 bedrooms, a balcony, and a kitchen just big enough for 1 pot simmering and 1 pan frying. But it is mine. Paid for in full, worth $200,000, and sitting right across from a park that breathes with life. From where I sit in the mornings, coffee in hand, I can watch children chasing kites and couples walking their dogs. It feels like the very definition of peace. The house I sold for $600,000 is gone, but the weight that came with it is gone too. In its place stands this quiet corner of the world, filled with light, filled with room to breathe. I keep busy. Twice a week I walk to the community center and help with a program for students whose families can't cover tuition. We raise money, organize scholarships, and sometimes just sit with them, listening to their hopes. Something is healing about placing energy where it grows instead of where it rots. Watching a young man open his first acceptance letter or a young woman say she can finally afford books. Those are moments that remind me why I chose to place the proceeds of my old house into a charitable trust. Margaret always believed education was the greatest inheritance we could leave. I feel her with me each time a check is handed to a trembling hand. It is as though her voice is stitched into every scholarship, whispering encouragement into the ears of kids who still believe the future can be built. Life, for me, has become smaller and richer at the same time. I walk in the park each afternoon, my shoes crunching over leaves, nodding to familiar faces. The church near the corner has become another home where no one asks about lawsuits or inheritances, only if I want coffee or pie after the service. I read more now, history, novels, even poetry that Margaret once loved. Some nights I sit on the balcony, the candle flickering by her photograph, and I tell her softly, "Margaret, I finally found peace." My voice trembles, but not from sorrow, from release. My children and siblings, however, live in the shadow of their choices. David rents a cramped apartment on the edge of town, drowning in bills he cannot keep up with. His wife grew tired of the whispers that followed them everywhere, and their once proud posture had collapsed into a hunch of survival. Stephen avoids community gatherings altogether, embarrassed by the stories that spread after the truth came out. Sharon, who once spat poison with every word, finds herself ignored. Her voice, sharp as a blade, no longer cuts because no one listens. Michael, without his job and reputation, has shrunk into silence. Their world has become smaller, not richer. And though I take no joy in their downfall, I see in their unraveling the proof that greed carries its own punishment. They chased money at the cost of love, and ended with neither. Not long ago I received a letter. The envelope was plain, the handwriting young and uncertain. It was from Ashley, Stephen's daughter. She wrote that she had heard about what happened and wanted to meet me. She said she wanted to know my side of the story, not the angry version her parents had told. She asked for a chance to sit down, just the two of us, and talk. My hands shook as I read her words, because in them I saw a glimmer of what could have been if respect had not been poisoned by greed. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. My heart ached to see her, but I chose distance. "Not yet," I whispered to Margaret's picture. "Not yet." Because while forgiveness may someday find its way, boundaries must remain. For now, my peace depends on silence. Still, that letter reminded me of something important, that even in families broken by betrayal, there are seeds that might still grow straight if planted in honest soil. I did not respond, but I prayed for her, and I reminded myself that the choice to keep distance is not the same as cruelty. It is dignity. It is self-respect. And it is the only way I can be sure not to be dragged back into storms I have already survived. I carry lessons now like stones in my pocket, small, solid, impossible to forget. For parents like me, the lesson is clear. Love your children, yes, but do not confuse love with surrender. Do not let affection blind you to betrayal. Set boundaries early and hold them even when your heart aches. For children, the lesson is sharper. Never treat your parents as wallets with legs. Money can be lost, but trust, once broken, cannot be rebuilt. When you see your parents only as resources, you lose the only inheritance that matters, their love and their respect. And for everyone living in this modern world, the truth is timeless. Greed will always whisper, but character will always shout. Money does not make a person, it only unmasks them. There are days when I replay the past in my head, the words they spoke, the pressure they applied, the way they looked at me like a door they could push open and walk through. Then I remember the look on their faces when the truth came out, when the documents were read, when the trust was revealed, when I said no. That memory no longer burns. It steadies me. It tells me I chose right. It tells me that sometimes survival means drawing a line and refusing to move, even when the line cuts across the people you once called your own. One afternoon, as I walked in the park, I paused near the pond where ducks floated lazily in the sun. I watched a boy and his grandfather feed them bits of bread. The boy laughed, the grandfather smiled, and for a brief second I saw my younger self, David at my side, Margaret's hand warm in mine. The ache rose, but it did not break me. Instead, it reminded me of what was once beautiful and why it hurt so much to lose it. I whispered to myself, I can miss who they were without allowing who they became to destroy me. That, too, is freedom. And so my life, quiet and steady, unfolds day by day. I water the small plants on my balcony. I greet the neighbors by name. I write in my journal each night one line of gratitude, no matter how small. A meal well cooked. A letter from a friend, the sound of rain on the window. I live not with wealth in my pocket, but with dignity in my chest. And that is enough. I have not answered their calls. I have not written back. Because I know this. Peace requires space. Respect requires distance when trust is gone. I will not reopen doors that once slammed so painfully. I do not need their words anymore. I have my own. I do not need their apologies. I have my freedom. And I whisper sometimes into the quiet of my apartment. I don't need them anymore. I have myself. And that is the richest inheritance of all. Each day that passes confirms it. I finally found where I belong. Each morning light, each walk through the park, each student who smiles because a door opened for them. These are the proofs that I chose well. Margaret's voice lingers in my memory. Character is the only wealth that can't be stolen. She was right, and I carry that truth like a lantern into whatever days remain. I close my eyes tonight knowing the story is finished, not in bitterness, but in peace. And as I drift to sleep, the last thought in my mind is simple, steady, and true. Family is not the blood that betrays you, it is the love that respects you. And that, at last, is enough. The story has come to an end. It has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.